Our next speaker is a Welshman, but he's spent 42 years in Cork. So as a proud Corkman myself, I'm trying to claim him, but I'm not sure if he's quite there yet, you know. He's from UCC, and he's going to speak to us about green manures. Give a warm welcome to Dr. Dr. Peter Jones.
Thanks very much. Given Wales's performance in the rugby recently, I know you're a happy crowd because you've done better than we have. What I want to talk about is short-term green manures and their possible role in organic vegetable production. This was part of a project that ran from 2018 to 2021. It was under the heading of MOPS. You might have heard of it. It was Maximising Organic Production Systems. And it was co-funded by the European Commission and by Department of Ag. And it was coordinated by Irish Organic Agriculture. The main aim of MOPS was to take 11 growers and try and develop individualized cropping systems for each of the growers. The growers ranged from 1 hectare to 100 hectares, so good range of scale. And in the 3 years, the sales of organic produce from those 11 farmers increased by 112%. It just goes to show that a bit of input into organic agriculture potentially is very beneficial and is going to have great returns. A secondary element of the project was a project on green manures. Long-term green manures have been known for a long time to be very important in organic agriculture, basically to improve, so they've grown for 2 or 3 years, they improve soil structure, they build up nutrient levels, so particularly during the organic conversion period, they're very useful. The idea of short-term green manures is less known. I think people know about it, but there's very little data, particularly in Ireland, there's no data on how effective it can be in a short term. So we're talking about the period between harvesting one crop and sowing the next one, when you've got bare soil and potential problems building up. In the summertime, when you harvest a crop and then you sow in the autumn, you might have a period of 2 to 3 months where the soil is going to be bare. If you're going to have a spring sown crop, you've got between harvest of your first cash crop to the sowing of the second one in the spring. You could have 6 to 8 months of bare soil. The problems with those is that you've got potentially you've got leaching of nutrients out of the soil as they become mobilized. You've got possible crusting of the soil, particularly clay-rich soils, which then can make water infiltration more difficult. Now, I'm calling these green manures, these plants which are grown purely to be incorporated into the soil. They're not going to be harvested at all. Green manures, catch crops, cover crops, to a large extent, they're the same thing, and one crop will do several functions. So with green manures, we're looking to get increased organic matter content when it's incorporated into the soil. Also, as a catch crop, the plants will take up any mobilized nitrogen in particular that's in the soil, and then that can be returned when the crop is incorporated back into the soil. And cover crops protect the soil from crusting. So what we wanted to do was to look at how well these would perform under an Irish situation. So we set up a 3-year trial. Now, 3 years is valuable because you've got the first year we did it, 2018, it was a very dry year. Next year, of course, it was a very wet year, and in 2020, it was medium. So see how well the green manures would perform under those different conditions. It was only done in one site, so that is the limitation for it. But because it was done over 3 years, we've got a way of testing how robustly it will work, if it does work. So this was carried out on the farm of Des Thorpe in Lacken, County Wexford, and we're very grateful for all his help on that. Basically, you have for each of the 3 years, we had 2 sets of green manures. We had summer green manures, which were put in the early summer, and then incorporated in the autumn. So usually in there for about 2.5 months. And the second one were winter green manures, which were sown and then incorporated 6 months later in the following spring. So for each of those 2 green manures, we had 3 different types. We took commercially available ones initially. In the future, if people want to do it, they can then try and maybe modify things to see which work best under their conditions. But these were commercially available, and therefore we felt it would be a good option to start with. So for the summer green manures, we had things like buckwheat and phacelia and rye, both being deep-rooting plants there, and then 1 nitrogen fixer with a couple of annual clovers, plus annual, it's a Westerwolds ryegrass. And then D, in all the charts I'll show you, D is the control. It's the one where there was no green manure planted. And then in the winter green manures, you had Landsberg, the classic. You had another one with 2 clovers and oats and rye, which was down as the Wild Atlantic mix, for those of a touristic bent. And then we had rye and vetch as the third one. And then after we'd incorporated the green manures, Des ran over them with a mulcher, a Ranieri mulcher, and then incorporated them in. And then 3 weeks later, there were the transplants of the cash crops. So for the summer green manures, it was brown onion and cabbage. And for the winter green manures, it was broccoli and red oak leaf lettuce. So this is part of the summer trial, summer green manure in the first year. You can see what you've got there. There were 4 replicates of each treatment. So each replicate was about 70 square meters. So it's a good size. Not huge, but a good size. So overall, each year we planted about, the trial was about an acre in total. So this was the summer one. You can see the flowering plant there is the buckwheat plot. So you can see that they're much taller than the others and so on. So that's the kind of scale that we were dealing with. So what we wanted to look at, we looked at what effect it was having on the soil and so on during the green manure growing, but particularly we wanted to see what was happening when the cash crop was planted in afterwards. So all I'm showing today would be the data from the cash crops themselves. So we're looking at things like the nitrogen levels in the leaves of the plants, weed management, any beneficial insects, soil bacteria and the diversity there, cash crop yield, and then it is important that if people are going to use it, it has to at least not lose money. So ideally do a cost-benefit analysis, find out what would be the return if you did a green manure. Now, each of these little bar charts is basically the same setup. What you got on the left is the summer green manure, on the right, the winter green manure. And I've just put in data for one of the 2 cash crops for each one. So it's the cabbage for the summer, oak leaf lettuce for the winter. And you've got the last block on each one is the control. So if you look there, look at the nitrogen levels in the cash crops, you can see that they're all higher than the control being the 4th one along in each of the bar charts. So the plants were able to take up more nitrogen. The nitrogen fixer in the summer green manure wasn't fixing nitrogen. It was just too short a time for the crop. They didn't have enough pink nodules to operate. So any improvement like that is almost entirely due to trapping any nitrogen that had been released during breakdown of organic matter. So that's reducing the leaching, and also when it's turned into the soil, that nitrogen is then available to the cash crop. With the winter green manure, you've got a similar trend again, but because in these cases, all three of them had nitrogen fixers in them, part of that contribution was due to the nitrogen fixers in the green manure. Then weed management. All of the green manures were very good at controlling annual weeds, and there was some knock-on effect of all of them in terms of annual weeds. There were reduced levels of annual weeds in the cash crops in both the spring and the winter, the summer and the winter green manures. But when you look at perennial weeds, which can be a problem, they started from a pasture, the piece of land there, so there were problems with docks, and there were problems with some perennial ryegrass. So if you again look at the last graph, the last line in each graph, that's the control. You can see that there are, in two of the summer plots, there were small differences, small reductions in the levels of perennial weeds. But in the second one, rye and vetch, you actually got a very big, drop in the number of perennial weeds, particularly docks. So what happens is when you turn in the green manure, rye in particular gives off chemicals which will inhibit some other plants. And it was doing this here, and it was actually being quite effective on that. And again, if you look at the winter ones, the smallest bar there, again, is a rye-containing green manure. So if you have a problem with with perennial weeds, rye is very useful on that. The bar next to the very small one also contains a rye, but at 20%, whereas the very low bar has 40% rye. So again, it's a quantitative effect as to how the rye is controlling perennial weeds. When we're looking then at beneficial insects, so we set up a number of deadfall traps in the green manures and in the cash crops. And these are just small containers at ground level containing alcohol. Apart from a number of Welshmen found in there, it was largely ground beetles we were finding along the way in the way of beneficial insects. So there's a common ground beetle on the right-hand side. Again, if you look there, the last bar is the control, and you can see that in the summer green manure, one of the green manures give you much more ground beetles than the others. Now, we assumed, like with the weeds, that the taller the green manure, the more protection it would give to the ground beetles, but that was not the case. We found that the highest number of ground beetles were in the lower growing green manures. So things like it was a clover-based one in the summer, and one without rye in it in the winter. So again, lower growing green manures seem to give you a beneficial effect. Whenever you incorporate green manures, you are going to increase your number of microorganisms, fungi and bacteria. I just put up some data there on a picture on bacteria. What these are plates with 96 wells in them. And in 95 of the wells, there's a different source of carbon, okay? So what happens then, you put in aliquots of the suspension of bacteria from the soils, and if the bacteria can use the carbon in that particular well, it will go purple. It will release a dye and go purple. So you see on the left-hand side, you have the controls. Only if maybe a third of the wells have turned purple. On the right-hand side is in the cash crop after a green manure, and you've got there probably 80% of the wells have turned purple. So what you have there is showing that you've got not only more bacteria, but you've got a greater functionality, a greater range of functions in the microbial biodiversity. So again, that's a positive thing, of a side effect of the green manures. Now, getting on to the relative yield. So what I've done here, just keep it simple. Keep it simple for myself, is to try and express it as a percentage of the control. So if you see again, the fourth line is the control. Anything above that is a greater yield. So in both cases, if you look at the blue lines there, you can see that the incorporating green manure and then putting in your cash crop transplants gave you a higher yield. In both summer and in winter. Now, if you look at the orange bars there, that was from 2018. In 2018, we were put a little bit to the pin of our collar because we suddenly got told that we had the funding. So we had to suddenly rush out and get everything started. And everything got compacted a bit. And what happened was that we, instead of planting 3 weeks after the incorporation of the green manure, we had to plant 2 weeks. And if you look there in the orange block, the rye and vetch green manure, when it's over the lettuce, when the lettuce was planted there, that green manure actually gave you a lower yield than the control. And the reason for that, it transpires from other work we did then, was because the rye that we talked about controlling, the perennial weeds, also inhibited the lettuce transplants. It didn't do it for any of the other crops that we used or for any others that we tested. So lettuce appears to be particularly susceptible. So in subsequent years, we increased the phase between the incorporation and planting from 2 weeks to 3.5 weeks. And we never had that problem again. So again, with all these things, there are certain fine-tuning that needs to be done. Then, when you're doing green manures, you've got additional costs. Oh, sorry, going back to this. Not only did you get increased yields, with these things like with the lettuce, the heads were bigger, same with the onions and so on. Well, what you also found that the quality in some cases, the lettuce in particular, was better after the implanting into the green manure. What we found was that the leaf integrity was better after green manures. You got a tighter head, and with one very short-lived experiment, it did seem to have a longer shelf life with that. So potentially that's another potential advantage of using green manures. So then the bottom line would be, can we try and balance the extra yield? Does it balance the extra costs of growing the green manures? And there are a number of costs there. You've got to buy organic seed. You're using diesel both for seed bed preparation for the green manure and for mulching and incorporation into the soil. And you've got labor. And the farmer did he charged us a lot for the labor. So we had a big figure there for that. But that's fine. We wanted to see if it was going to make commercial sense. So in the 3 years of the study, we had 3 years, 3 green manures in the summer, 3 in the winter. So that's 3 times 3, that's 8, that's 9, times 2, 2 seasons, that's 18, times 2 cash crops, that's 36. So overall, there are 36 different combinations. And when we looked at the figures, one of them gave a net loss, and that was the lettuce in the first year that we just talked about. 9 of them gave a net neutral effect. There was no, they gave a higher yield, but it wasn't statistically significantly better. And the remaining 26 gave a net profit. So overall, there is potential here. Not only are you able to cover your costs and maybe make a slight increase in profit, but also you've got the environmental effects, you've got less leaching of nitrate, you've got potentially more biocontrol of pests using beneficial insects like the ground beetle and so on. And you've got maybe a better quality of product as well, like with the lettuce. So conclusions, what we're finding is that we had quite a lot of positive effects, no major negative effects apart from the rye killing the lettuce. But we've got largely positive effects. You're getting increased nitrogen, largely in the summer from acting as a cash crop. We've got more ground beetles, so potentially that could, they feed, depending on the ground beetle, they feed on caterpillars, aphids, and some feed on slugs as well. So potentially you're doing a level of control of potential pests of your cash crop. And you've also got, of course, increased soil organic matter. So you've got all the additional benefits of that as well. And that then has a knock-on effect on the soil microbial biodiversity. So there, if you wanted to encourage particularly the beneficial insects, go for low-growing green manures. They seem to be best in both winter and summer. If you were emphasizing the organic matter, then the high biomass green manures. You saw in the first slide the size of the phacelia and the buckwheat, and that was in 2 months. So they grow very quickly and they generate a lot of green manure. Also, you've got the potential of increased weed management. You've got, particularly with the rye-based ones, all the crops did do better, sometimes significantly, sometimes not. What happened was that they developed rather more quickly than the controls. So potentially what you could do if you were manual harvesting of your crop, you could do a green manure on half the site, and that would then spread the harvest period out. And we did get an increased net profit margin on some of the plots. So that's it. Basically it, is that there are potential benefits there. People always talk about short-term green manures, but there's very little hard data out there. So hopefully this gives people an idea of what is possible. If you want to try it yourself, it's a very straightforward thing to do. The only limiting factor, not limiting, the thing is how to incorporate the green manure. Des used a mulcher, dedicated mulcher. Not everyone will have that, but you might have a flail mower, you might have, there's a number of things that will do a similar job. So really on that, it is quite, potentially it has got potential for exploitation. And just to thank Des and Olive for letting us mess up their farm. All members of the MOPS project, particularly the CEO, Gillian Westbrook, who got the thing funded, and thanks to the funding bodies and to Irish Organic Association. Okay, thanks.
Peter, thanks very much for a great talk. Have a seat there, we'll have a chat. So I suppose the first question is, a lot of the things that come up here, people hear about them for the first time, and then they need to go home and try and figure out their own version of it, your own context, your own soil, your own part of the world. So of the ones that you did there, have you any advice in terms of the different crops that you might grow afterwards, or the different soil type, or is it in its infancy to give kind of? It's
in its infancy. Like we were trying to get a range of crops of different plant families and different nutritional needs and such. Whatever you want to, you should be able to use this on most things. Lettuce seemed to be the only one that was sensitive to the green manures in a negative way. So basically, what I would encourage people to do is give it a try on a small part. If you're growing vegetables organically, consider putting a small amount down to a green manure and see how it goes. What you've got is you can buy, Fructal Farms. I'm not sponsored by Fructal Farms, but they are the people who supplied us with the seed. They've got a wide range of green manures available. You can buy small quantities, put it down, and see how it behaves on your farm. So basically, that would be it.
Great. Yeah. Is there a question here in the audience?
Slugs and aphids, especially for cover crops and then going into winter barley. Do you see issues with the cover crops and lots of slugs?
Yeah, there potentially. You're quite right. But I think one of the things I didn't mention was that when we did when we try to encourage the ground beetles, what we did was when we mulched the green manure, we left a thin strip of the green manure, because otherwise any ground beetles you had were being mulched as well. So we left a little area where a refuge for the ground beetles next to each of the plots. And what we found then was that the ground beetles stayed in that area until you put the cash crop. And then when that had developed, then they partly moved into the cash crop. So if you were having a problem with slugs, there's a reasonable chance that the ground beetles would help to control that in the winter barley that you're mentioning there.
Very good. Have we another question there, Scott? I have another one there for Peter, that the timing of the desiccation or the timing of the destruction, is it just before you plant, or is it a long time before for some nutrient cycling, or do you have any advice on that part of it?
On that, we came to the conclusion after a number of trials that 3 weeks was sufficient. If you mulched the green manure and then left it for 3 weeks and then planted, you were okay. Now, I think if you're not using a mulcher, I'd leave it possibly for another week, because the mulchers do a tremendous job. But so maybe take another week so they have a good chance of breaking down.
And it sounds like there's more figuring out in every single context of the different crops, the different timings, the different soils, that it'll grow from here as knowledge is built.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think if people are willing to do it, they can end up doing a system that's unique to their own particular. You're not going to be harvesting this thing. You're not going to be able to trying to sell it. What you're doing is this is for your own good. So you could get a system that works for you, and you can play around with the concentrations, the numbers of say rye, increase it, decrease it, whatever. If you know what your concern is, do you want to, is it a summer or is it a winter green manure? You can work out what's being an appropriate one and give it a try. It really doesn't take much to do. Sorry, one other thing. One of the things we found as well that Des Thorpe found is that in those plots where he'd incorporated the green manure, he found that actually he saved in terms of the amount of diesel he needed when he was preparing the ground for the cash crop, because the soil was much more friable, much more easily handled with that. So again, there was a small benefit there on that.
So presumably over time, with more of this, it would be always improving.
Yes.
I like that, and it's kind of a recurring thing here that go away and play with this. You'll get inspiration here and you'll get knowledge here, but really it's sort of handing you the responsibility at home then to go and figure it out a little bit more.
I think so, yeah.
It's a recurring theme.
Yep.
Peter, thanks very much for a fantastic talk. Thank you.